Reminder, since the recording is in progress, if there is a reason that you do not want to be seen on video, you turn your microphone or turn your camera off. We have now started, as some people have requested, the closed captioning. If it is the kind of thing that drives you crazy when you don't need it, down at the bottom, you should have a CC live transcripts. You click the button and it can say hide it or view it full. It's your choice. We also say that if you're going to be having your breakfast on the West Coast or lunch on the East Coast or snacks in between, that it would be courteous to turn off your camera while you're eating. Also, if you get up to leave, it's probably best to turn it off so that we wouldn't want to see you fall or something on that. As always, or a little bit different, today we're doing a Q&A for Linux. We had a very successful Q&A last week for Windows, Ask Away. We have a panel of people who will be answering the questions that were submitted during the registration process. And Judy will be asking different panels, different questions. They will answer the questions to their ability. Then if there's somebody else on the team that wants to add to that, they will. And if any of you have anything that's even more to add to it, I'll ask you to use your reaction button, raise your hand, and then I will click the button that lets you unmute yourself that you can share an answer. We won't take any new questions until the very end, because we've got a lot of good questions that came through. Judy has her hand up. That's very good. And so then I would be able to go down and click on the button that says you can unmute yourself.
I'm already unmuted.
Right.
Thank you. I need Old Red and Tim.
We don't have that on this bar. You know, you have to go down to a different adult bar to get Old Red.
I know, and Mike, to all put their first and last name on their thumbnail, because we have several Mikes and a couple of Tims, and I don't know which one you are. Thank you so much. And if you don't want to receive the follow-up material, you don't have to do that.
Okay.
And I'll be back in a little bit. We're going to go to Sunny's.
I can hear somebody. Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshops, where we get together in the middle of the week to talk tech, learn tech, and experience tech. Today, we are having our second Ask Away, and this is going to be focusing on the world of Linux. In the beginning, we will have questions that were submitted from those at the registration time. When we are all done with the submitted questions that we have today, then we'll open it up for additional questions. And we will be able to have people give answers, because some of the questions, maybe even the panel members aren't quite sure of the answer. And if you have the answer, that's great, because this is what APCG is all about. Members helping members, groups helping groups, and we all learn at the same time. I think I went through all the beginning stuff before, so I think we'll just get started right away. And Judy will be monitoring the questions, and she will be asking, and we'll just sit back. Oh, no, time out. We're doing polls first. We found out this last week. So what we're going to do is, as we have a number of polls, and we're going to do all of them first, and then later on we might talk about them. Mostly it's information for the Linux team to see what's going on. And so we're going to do is, I have the panel as non-co-host because they want to be able to do the surveys. So here's the first survey that I'd like everybody to fill out, because this is one for everybody. There's a two-part question, and it's for people who are using Linux and just trying out Linux. So this is a question for everybody. We'll leave that up for a little bit to get almost everybody's answer in. I'll share the answers later. Very interesting, very interesting. Okay, I'll wait just another couple seconds. And there are some people who haven't answered that you should be able to answer the first question, yes or no.
Come on, you guys, let's all participate. It's 2 clicks of your mouse.
All right, we'll close that one out.
Poop, all right.
Close that one out. And we'll go to the next one. And this is also open to everyone, whether you're a user or a tester. This is a multiple choice, so you can even ask one or two, give 1 or 2 answers. If I could sing, I'd do the Jeopardy music or whatever, but I won't.
You're not going to do that to us?
No, no. Because I know that just because I said that, it's running in your head already by yourself. Okay, we're just about had the people answered. Got a good number of people here today. Last chance. Ending that one. All right, now this is for the ones who have been either using it or testing out. Can you tell me what family of the Linux tree you're running? We've talked about this before, that the Linux started out as a big tree with many trunks is really what it is. And these are the main trunks of Linux. And I want you to tell me, if you can, which of these families that you're using, not the actual distro, but the family that it came from. These are the ones that started out in the beginning and then have branched off to many, many, many other versions of Linux because of the open source recipe. While we're doing that, also, I forgot to say that should you have a question that you don't want to ask us, verbally, you might be able to send those to Judy. Don't send them to anybody else, because then they won't get asked. Sig, you'll see in the next survey question, Ubuntu is not a family tree. I'll give you a hint. It's under the Debian family. Okay, a few more seconds. This one's a little bit, that was a little bit harder question because you got to kind of know where it came from, but the answer is kind of what I expected. All right, this next one, because there are so many choices, question 1 and question 2 are really the same thing. Zoom doesn't let me allow more than 10 answers. So I have to do it in 2 parts.
Hmm.
Being multiple choice, you will be able to scroll down for the rest of the list. This is the actual list of what distro are you using, multiple choice if you're using more than one, but you'll need to scroll down for the second half of the list. Because there are just so many. Because there are some of you that might be, old Red's back, Judy. So if you happen to be using a couple different ones, I know in terms of Orv, he uses one on his desktop, but he's got Raspberry Pi, so he's using a different one for them. We're just liking to see, you know, what are the different distros people are using.
Hey, John,
Yes.
my submit button's grayed out.
You have to choose one and two.
Yeah, that's why there's an other in 2 that you can hit.
Oh, got it, got it.
That went over my head.
Yeah. Sometimes teachers say you've got to pick an answer. Okay, we'll just a couple more seconds or so on that. This is going to be helpful just because I think everybody, this is an answer that everybody want to know. What's most everybody using? 3, 2, 1. Last one, we have had workshops in the past on different distros. And then we had workshops on different desktop environments. And this is something new to Windows users because in Windows, there is only one, but in Linux, we have multiple ones. So again, it's a 2-part. So, you know, you might before I didn't know that it wouldn't let you, but tell me which ones. Now, if you're somebody who is testing out Linux, the question would be, which ones have you really liked that you've been testing out in terms of desktop environment? So here's your big long list again. And we've talked about most of these, and that's another thing that's in Linux confusing because you've got desktop choices, distribution choices, and of course, software choices. This is our first time using these polls for me, and I'm learning about it. So now I need to know if ever I have to do a multiple question to get all the answers, leave an other or something else, none of the above. That's what I need to have.
So John,
Yeah,
in order for the submit button to not be grayed out, you have to choose one from the second group.
yeah. That did I put another there?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
use that.
Yeah. Since there's no answer. I know from others that I'm not quite sure what. I'd be curious for those people who said other. Windows was not a choice.
Mike Linderman has his hand up.
Oh,
Reactions button, please.
David Hine has his hand up.
yeah. I'm not quite sure what kind of questions people would have.
John's looking for the people.
Dave,
I'm a
Question.
new guy to this. I'm using the default, whatever it is in the Ubuntu distribution, but I don't even know what that is.
GNOME.
All right.
John?
Yeah.
George Bowden says he doesn't see Judy Taylor in the list.
So
And
that's
what
because
list?
it's spelled Taylor.
Oh, actually,
Oh,
nobody's. on the
sorry,
list except
I'm
for-
not a co-chair yet.
Yes, that's correct.
There's only two right now, John and Bill.
Yep. Because we're not doing questions yet.
Okay, so please hold your question
Right.
until
Yeah.
my name appears.
Nobody can unmute. So, all right. So we'll end that poll. And that's the last poll. And now I'll get my co-host back. All right, I think I have all the co-hosts back. So as a quick review, if you have problems with Zoom, please check with Bill James to help you solve those. If you have any questions to submit to Judy, you can either wait and ask them yourself, which we like better because sometimes we don't understand your questions, but you can submit those to Judy. All right, so as we go again, Judy will be asking different panel members different questions that came from the registration sheets, and we'll just ask and get answers and see what's going on. So Judy, I'll let you take over.
Are you sure I'm a co-host?
Yes, I see you on the list.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not on my list.
Under the
Yeah.
chat, under chat.
Okay, John, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Gail would like to know, do you have, I don't think that's you have a guided step-by-step workshop to install Linux?
Good question. And yes, we happen to have two of them. If you go back through apcug2.org and go to our YouTube channel and you go to click on playlists, you'll see all of our Linux workshop recordings. The second workshop that we did way back when, Orv did a step-by-step install for a Linux. I don't even remember which one he did, but we did. And if you look at the list to a workshop that was after number 10, some of the workshops we didn't number because they were not exactly learning Linux track. It would be in the September 29th workshop. I did a very detailed customized Linux. The other thing is that all you have to do is go on the web, DuckDuckGo, and say how to install whichever Linux, and there are loads of videos because sometimes you have a version of Linux that has an install program a little bit different. Like the Debian ones have one kind, Arch has one kind, Red Hat would have a slightly different process the way they do it. So if you're looking for a particular Linux version to install, you can see the general ones that we did, or you can go to the web and find the exact one that you want to know how to install.
Thank you. Again, for John, Ed would like to know we'll just get this out of the way, okay? Which one looks and feels like Windows 10 or 11?
I'll go ahead and do my whole kit, and then when Judy comes across one of the other questions. This is an answer that most of you are not going to like. Living in the Windows world, you didn't have choices, and there was only one. Living in the Linux world, there's always more than one. There is no one that's best, because it's all subjective. You can go to a list of listings and find different people say different ones. So when you are looking for what's the best of this or that, it's not going to be one. You have to pick from a few. Now, what you might want to do is trust somebody who you feel has the knowledge, like the guys on our team, and ask them and let them suggest what they think might be the best. But if we wanted to talk about what's best, you know, for Windows replacement, you could talk about Zorin, which we've talked about before. Mint, that I use, I feel is an easy replacement for Windows. Some people say Ubuntu. I don't necessarily agree with Ubuntu, which was the one that we had somebody say, because it comes with a GNOME desktop. I don't think that a GNOME desktop is very easy for Windows users to switch to. Orv runs Kubuntu, which is a different version of Ubuntu that has a more similar Windows look to it. But for me, I would still not use that quite first off, because it has a lot of features and there's a lot to learn how to work KDE. It's great, but you got to learn. I would probably say if you wanted to go to the Ubuntu line, go to Ubuntu Mate or Ubuntu XFCE. Linux Lite is another one that is very similar to Windows. And one called Sparky Linux. Now, some of these are not, I don't want to say top of the line, but more popular, but they are out there for what looks good. So any of those would be good for Windows users. Now, if you're somebody who, for some reason, wants something to look like Windows 10, I don't know why, but there is a version that we've had out, and I think Mike has been one that's talked about it, called Linux FX. It is a copycat. I still don't know how anybody is allowing Linux FX to do what they do, because they have stolen all of the visuals that belong to Windows 10 and put it into this Linux. If you sat somebody down, if I sat Judy down in front of here, in front of Linux FX, it would be a while before she would realize, oh, I'm not on Windows 10 anymore, because all the icons are the same. They stole those, the backgrounds, the menus the same. So if you're doing that, so there are a few others that they say is good for Windows 10. Now, we also have people say, well, what's the best one for older computers or 32-bit? Well, the one problem is with 32-bit, it's so out of date, but we still have some computers that are still running, and then it's good. So if you're looking for Linux for older ones, then we're talking about the actual Debian itself, because it has 32-bit. The Zorin, you have to get Zorin Lite. That runs on 32-bit. The regular Zorin is a 64-bit. We have both Antex and MX Linux that will also work on older 32 bits. And I'm sorry, but the Sparky Linux is for the older ones, not for the newer ones. So now there's not going to be which one is the best, because they're all good. It's personal preference. If you were somebody who was wanting a Mac replacement, well, the one that we have that's closest to a Mac replacement would be Elementary, because its desktop and icons are set up more to look like a Mac machine. Then, of course, we always come to the big question that we were asked a number of times today in this group: what is the best Linux for beginners? Again, there will not be a best. if you look at the list, the majority of the list repeat these 4 names at the top: Mint, Zorin, Elementary, and Ubuntu. But remember that the Ubuntu with the GNOME desktop is not. I think is easy for a beginner. It's very simple. We also have some newer versions that are not from the old tree with Solus, Deepin, and Peppermint. So you can see that in Linux, you're not going to get anybody. You can't even get anybody to agree that there is a one best. But all of these categories you can find on the internet, go down there and say, what's the best one for beginners? You'll be told 8, 9, maybe 10 different ones. Try it. They're free. They don't cost you anything. And that way, find the one that you like the best. The best way to do it is the one that Mike taught us a long time ago about going to, no, it wasn't Mike, it was our guy from Pennsylvania who said that it's off my head. It's the one where you can go and test a Ubuntu live on the web. It takes a little bit longer to line up, but you don't have to download anything. You just go to it and try them out. So Judy, that's what I'd say. Anybody else on the team that wants to add to the question about what's the best?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. It's Windows FX11.
Well,
Windows FX11 is the one, not in the best, but the one that's most Windows-like.
okay, Windows FX and Linux FX are the same one. One's going by the name of Linux FX. The development name is Windows FX, but that would be kind of a copyright infringement. So I think that they are using the Linux FX to keep from getting into too much trouble, but they're both the same. Because when I looked it up, they you know, one's the development name is Windows FX, and then the one they're going by was Linux FX, so that they don't get in trouble. But yeah, either name, check it out. You should be able to get to the same one.
I have a comment about that too. I downloaded it and installed it in a virtual machine, and I found it similar enough to be confusing. So I personally, I would stay away from it, but that's an opinion.
Right.
The one I found recently though is PopOS. I've been seeing a lot of articles about that, and I found that really simple to install, and they have a really good app store. So it's another thought that, and it's Windows looking, if you will.
Yeah, PopOS is made by the company System 76
Right.
that actually produces Linux machines, laptops, and workstations. And I just read that they are deciding they're going to come up with their own desktop environment. They've been using the GNOME and something else. They've decided we're going to go completely. So keep your eye on PopOS as a newcomer and a youngster in this group.
So that would be a good one for a new casual user to use.
Think so, Dave?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's pretty simple.
There you go, David. There's your answer.
Yeah, and again, to answer that question, because it's on my list, but I didn't put anything by it, because to me, a casual user is either looking for a Windows replacement, is a beginner. So any of those that we've listed are okay for casual user. The one I would not say for a casual user would be anything Arch-based, probably, because being a rolling release, it changes and has little hiccups. So any of the Debian ones, the Ubuntu, that family down there, you know, I can't even come up with a small number of casual users. They're just beginner users, Windows users.
And I think every distro you mentioned is a Debian based distribution.
Yeah, because that's the easier one to use than Arch and the Red Hat, in my opinion. And according to the survey, that's what it also shows, that more people use Debian based ones and Ubuntu and down through that.
I did a comparison yesterday a little bit with elementary and PopOS as far as looking for applications or apps to install and how easy they would be to install. And I found Pop was a little bit more complete as far as, at least as far as the applications that I tend to use. So there's a input.
John, you answered John T's and Mike H's questions. They were number 9 on my list here, so I'm crossing that one off.
Good. Okay.
I have a question for Cal, and it's a long one. There are many Linux distributions. Does each Linux distribution have their own team, techs, leadership that is responsible for issuing their particular distribution's Linux OS updates and security updates? And are you aware of any distribution whose updates have been bad, buggy, or hurtful?
Okay, the Linux kernel is handled by the Linux Foundation, and it's led by Linus Torvalds, and they have about 50 people who contribute routinely, and they have 8 or 9 distributions that are kernels that are kept up to date long term, and there's a website that all the distributions can go to and get the patches, the updates, and they all fix them. And it's so the Linux Foundation does all the updates. They're the experts, and then the distributions, all they have to do is go get it and compile and put it in their repository. So it's the Linux Foundation, not the individual's distribution for the most part. And the second part, what you would look for is what things have had a problem. Do not try release candidates. And like John said, stay away unless you know what you're doing from rolling releases. And examples of problems that we've had is when GNOME went from 2 to 3 series, and they just went to 4. So be aware of brand new things, just like a card. Don't take the first version. So those are my answers.
Thank you. Orv.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you've been in Linux for a while, you're aware that there's a lot of subsystems, printing, networking, file systems, drivers, etc. There are teams of developers who maintain and update all of those subsystems independently. And anytime they submit a change to the source code, it goes up to the lead of that subsystem. He QAs it, makes sure that it's proper and suitable for submittal. That goes into the next pending Linux release. This has nothing to do with the UI. This is all the Linux kernel and utilities and stuff. And then it rolls up to Linus Torvalds, who is the keeper of all patches. And if he approves them, they go into the next kernel release. So what happens is the maintainers of a distribution get all of that pre-approved and pre-built. All they have to do is roll it into their favorite distribution with their UI. That make sense?
Yes. And while you're there, I have a question for you. And this comes from Tom, an easily understood source for all the cryptic and arcane commands and their functions would be very useful.
I have just the thing. Can I share my screen? Let's see, which one is it here?
John says yes.
Let's see, where is that? Okay. I derived this from this website here, but in very brief. And this is a very simplified, let me get this larger, very simplified version of the Windows file system tree. There's a lot more to it than that. But basically, you can see a tree, upside down tree from your, well, we call it the root of the tree, but it's an upside down tree, so it's at the top. And I don't find this distribution, this structure very consistent, because they have executables scattered all over. But then again, so does Linux. This one is way more detailed than it needs to be. This is a Linux file structure. Really, what the average user needs to be concerned with is the home directory. And remember, it's a multiple user system, and everybody's home directories are under home. When you install a program, what you're installing is a library, a collection of files. The binary files, the executables, will go in /user bin. If there are any unique libraries, and libraries are shared a lot among programs, they'll go in lib. If there's a configuration file, it will go in etc in the etc directory, or if it's a really complex program, it will have something like /etc/LibreOffice. Additionally, over and above the default config files, if you modify the configuration side, say like LibreOffice, it will go in home under .config, and I talk some more about that later. I mentioned the URL. That'll come in the notes to you, Judy.
Thank you. This question is for Mike. Howard is having problems with his inkjet printer. It doesn't work with Linux, and he would like to know the next printer he buys, he needs it to work with Linux, and what should he buy?
Okay. I'm having a little problem with my video. I'm having to stop it and start it, so just bear with me as I do that. My camera's acting up today. For Howard specifically, you want to research the latest printers in either probably the HP, the Epson, or the brother, maybe Canon, and actually go to their support sites and then drill down to their drivers and then take a look and see if they have Linux drivers, especially if you're shopping the upcoming Black Friday sales. You're going to see a lot of printers, maybe last year's models, things like that. But check out the model, go to the manufacturer's support site, and then take a look. Now, I have 3 brother printers, and if I take just a minute or two and share my screen, I'll show you what we did in a recent CFCS Linux SIG. So we had similar questions. How do I get my multifunction printer, for example, to scan or to use the fax? And my research on several of the distros of Linux which we installed is that most of them will detect initially a connected network printer, especially if it's Wi-Fi and not connected via USB to one of your computers that are on the network. And most of them are, sorry, I've got a phone ringing here that I got to stop. Okay. So what I did as the example is I actually went to the brother. Well, first of all, I said, okay, what is showing up on Mint? What printers are actually located? So before we even started to install drivers or look for drivers, the default display displayed the 3 brother drivers that we have. We have 2 multifunction printers on our network. One was slightly older than the other, and then we had gotten last year a color brother. And Mint identified them immediately, and we could print, no driver installations or anything. We also did this on PopOS, and it showed up. Over here, you're going to see the end result of our research, where going to Brother, we were able to download their installation package and get the ability to both print and scan. So what we did live was to actually go to the Brother support site, and you can go to supportbrother.com, and it's probably very similar for the other printer manufacturers. Probably start at their top levels and drill down to support. And then we went and we looked for their downloads. And then after we went to downloads, I entered in my Brother laser printer, and I got this page, and I was doing it from my Linux computer, and it immediately recognized that I was using Linux, and I just had to use the drop down to pick which one it was going to be. And then they had an overall driver install tool. And below that are specific printer drivers, specific scanner drivers, and specific fax drivers. So we decided, okay, let's get the install tool. On the same page were instructions. Now at this point, we're past working in the GUI. We're past a simple install for the beginner. But at one time or another, you're going to have to learn to use the terminal. And they give you all the terminal commands. So in order to get the scanning capability to use two of the three printers that we had, I had to follow these instructions. And so we downloaded the installer, we unpacked it. I actually unpacked it using the GUI instead of the command line in the terminal. I then used the sudo command and ran the command that they said, all right, this is the installer that you want to install, which will have the name, and then put in the Brother machine name. So for example, they say in the terminal, you would type in bash linux-br printer-installer 2111, and then put in the name of the printer that we were doing it. And they give you some hints. So I actually printed this page out because when you're in the middle of the install, you kind of want the hints in front of you. So a quick screen capture. The first thing I did to make the install easier is I just renamed that long complex file using the rename command. I just said, let's just rename it BR printer. Okay, so then my command was sudo bash, which is what they said, the BR printer, which is what I want to run, and then the name of my printer. And it acknowledged it and said, okay, you're going to install the following packages. Is it okay, yes or no? Eventually you get down to a display of all the UIDs that are the printers on your network. And it tells you in the instructions, if it's a USB printer, just connect it by the cable. But if it's on your network, you need to know what the UID was. I had no idea what the UID was, but nice of them to actually show it. So it actually popped up and it said, just enter 11. I entered 11. It's kind of hard to see it there, but there's an 11 there. It went through a whole string of commands, and I didn't even try to understand everything it was doing. It finally got to the next question and said, enter your IP address. Well, I hadn't written it down. So we stopped this process. I went and looked for the IP address, found it on the network, and we came back and picked up at this point. Eventually, we got it to install, and it was running so that I now had this printer on my network installed from the driver. Now, I have a choice in any of my apps to print either to this printer or this printer as far as printing goes. Same one, just slightly different driver. But my document scanner application now shows this printer as available, and we test scanned it and it worked fine. I did not download the fax installer, but I think it would have gone the same way. So it's a little bit of an expansion on the answer, but always check the manufacturer's site, drill down through their support and their downloads, make sure they've got a Linux driver. If all you want to do is print, it most likely is going to print right out of the box. But if you have problems, that's the process you'd go through.
Cool, thank you.
Over to Orv.
Mr. H, you're on.
Yeah. If you're shopping for, let me share my screen again. If you're shopping for a printer and you're concerned about Linux compatibility, the first place to go is linuxprinting.org or Open Printing. Linuxprinting.org will take you here. And what you can do is you can go scroll down here to the printer database. And for instance, let's pick Brother, just since we were talking about it. show all the printers, and they will sort them. You can see the the three Tux Penguins for perfectly. And generally, the newer ones are perfect. The older ones, you'll find something down here mostly. And the even older ones, well, there's a partially. And here is paperweights. Prop a door open with them. That's the first place to shop. What that means is within the distributions repositories, generally you'll have all of the available files you need to run the printers perfectly. That doesn't mean they're installed by default. For instance, my HP printer, an all-in-one, it printed just fine, but I had to download the HP lip package, which was in the repository. So apt install HP lip, poof, done. And I'm sure it'd be much easier via the GUI package manager that comes with your distribution. But that's, if you're looking for a new printer, that's the place to go. And by the way, the printing subsystem I had talked about in Linux is called CUPS, Common Unix Printing System. It manages the thing called FOO-matic, F-O-O-matic. You don't need to worry about that, but generally it supports all the drivers underneath CUPS, and you don't have to worry about it, but there are people constantly tweaking on these because they're open source and they're always being improved, and you always see improvements in printer drivers. So I would say go to linuxprinting.org. Generally HP and Epson are perfect once you install all the needed files from a repository. And that's all I have to say about that. But like he pointed out, frequently you'll find a printer that says partially, but then you can go to the vendor and find their proprietary driver files and install them there. And they will run under CUPS.
Thank you. John.
And I'll go one little step past that, because I ran into the problem years ago that I had a printer that I thought was fantastic. It was like the best printer I had for a long time, but it was a Canon printer and didn't really have the good drivers. It kind of worked, like Orv and Mike have said, because there are automatic default drivers that come, so it kind of works, but didn't have any of the features. And I can't fault the manufacturer companies, because they are making too many printers, too many models, too many variations. And that list that Orv showed you was just one brand. I think I was the Brother one. That was just their list. And then you got the others. In order to be able to have drivers, somebody has to write them. And you don't have a lot of people. You got to remember that in the Linux world, it's a free world. And you've got to find somebody who's going to take the time to do all of this development stuff. However, I had this printer that I did not want to give up. And so I did a search and found out that there is a company in the world that will create drivers for maybe not the top ones because they are automatically, but I found that driver for my Canon. I had to pay for it, but it was worth it because I wanted to keep that computer. The place you want to go is, let's see if we do this. Is turboprint.info. That's kind of a strange extender, but that's the company. So these are printers, drivers for Unusual. So you can see how you can go through these. I'm going to hit the Canon just for fun. And these are all of the ones that they have created drivers. I had one of the Pixmas. I can't remember now which one I had. So I was able to come through here and find drivers for old models, new models, and you pay for it, but it was worth it. And all you do is pay for it once. A couple years later, there was a new version of TurboPrint. And I said, oh, I think I'll get the new version. When I went and checked, all the new versions do is add additional printers since the last time. So you only buy it once. And for me, this TurboPrint driver was better than any printer drivers that I've ever used with the options that it had. It was fantastic. So there is a third party that you could go to and find drivers, because maybe what our question person has is a printer that works great, just won't work with Linux, doesn't have any Linux drivers at the manufacturer. He might check TurboPrint and find out they have one, and he's going to be happy-go-lucky and going to be able to continue using that printer.
Thank you, guys. Or as long as you're around, how do I run a program when a user logs in at the X window logon?
I thought you'd never ask.
Oh, well, you know, it's number 7. You guys have been talking a lot.
Okay. When we were talking about subsystems, there is a group called TLDP, the Linux Desktop.org. And long ago, they started nailing down standards for file formats for configuration files and stuff. And one of the things they did was for applications. And when you install a program, it generally will install a specification for how it gets displayed on the desktop. Let me, again, share my screen. Oh, I didn't share my screen, dummy. Okay, generally, it's home user directory, and it's in a hidden subdirectory, and it's hidden because of the dot in front of it here, .config. Let me go over here. Print working directory, PWD. I'm in home obeach.config. I'm going to list the files, and I'm going to pipe them to more, which is a screen at a time. And you can see all of these things. Some directories, some not. And all of these are files. When the program starts, it consults them. Let's pick one that's, I don't know. I have the communications app called Slack in here. Oop. It happens to be a subdirectory. And that's too complicated. We'll use it up. Let's pick a simpler one. I don't know. By the way, you'll notice some of these end in RC. That's a legacy naming. Before we had systemd for controlling things, we had run commands, rc.local, rc.widip. It's complicated, but it stands for run control. And a lot of these were never renamed when they became config files. Let's see. Oh, that's a really simple one. Let me show you the one I had to display here. Where is it here? Okay. So this is the file slack.desktop or something like that. Starts with a bracketed desktop entry, and there are a bunch of entries there. Many of those are not mandatory. I've seen them that are one-liners, stuff like that. This defines to the operating system, or more correctly, the UI. What do I start? What's the icon for it? You know, stuff like that. And yeah, down here, this goes into great detail if you have to manually create one, and how to. The question was how to auto start it. In the config directory .config, there is a subdirectory called auto start, and any desktop config file that's in the auto start directory will start when that user logs in. And I think that was Dave that asked that question. So I went and checked, and sure enough, well, I'm not on the computer, but it does in fact work. I found desktop entries in there for the 3 communications programs I use. So it works as advertised.
Thank you. Dave Melton, you're up. I think the first one has been answered. Roderick wanted to know how to get a distro that is recommended for a beginner. And he would like to install the distro on a Windows 10 laptop. The laptop has a Celeron processor, 8 gigabytes of RAM, lots of ports, and a 500 gigabyte SSD.
Yeah, I looked that up, and I was afraid that a Celeron might not be capable of doing that. I think he wanted to be able to either dual boot or run Linux at the same time as Windows. So I was going to suggest using VirtualBox. However, I don't think the Celeron will run VirtualBox. I put in the chat or on the notes a website for Intel to look up the particular model of your Celeron to see if it's capable of virtual technology, running a virtual machine within Windows. So the answer is you could run it if your Celeron is capable of doing that, but I don't think it's capable. The rest of your hardware certainly can. You have plenty of disk space. You have a fast SSD, and RAM, 8 gig of RAM is certainly capable of running 2 operating systems. So unless somebody else has a better answer than that, that's what I was able to find with the Celeron. In this case, the Celeron is the limiting factor.
Kind of on that, Dale would like to know, can you have both Windows and Linux operating systems and move between the two? And if so, how do you do that?
Okay, yes, you can. And if, let's see, I could share my screen and show you exactly how to do that. Let's see. How do I share my screen? Okay, screen share. And screen 2. So are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so here what I have is two Linux windows running in VirtualBox. And so I'll log into this one. Oops, too many. So here, just so you can see, I don't have it full screen because I wanted you to see that I'm running Windows as well. And here is a folder that I have created. I think I can make that bigger, right? No. Anyway, I have a folder that I created on one of my hard drives called VirtualBox Shared Folders. And in it, I have a bunch of files. So from here, I can open the files. I'm in GUI, obviously. And then I can click on, this is showing my home directory. And here is that same file folder in Linux. And you can see the same files that I have displayed here within the Linux distribution or desktop that I'm running. And so if I were to modify a file here in Windows, you would see it change over here in Linux. And you can drag and drop. So like this, I could just drag it and drop it over here. Actually, no, I can't. But you can copy the files back and forth and make updates and delete files on whatever. So you have both both operating systems accessing the same files. A caution with that, though, is if you're not real comfortable with your Linux and you mess with something that might be infected for some reason, and the reason you have it in a virtual box is to separate it or sandbox it from Windows, be careful that you're not infecting your Windows machine, or vice versa for that matter. So I hope that helps.
And I think that kind of answered Tony's question. Can I dual boot Windows 10 and 11 and Linux?
Well, this isn't really dual booting though. This is actually running Linux inside of Windows. Dual booting would be something that when you boot the computer, you select which operating system you're going to run and you run that one exclusively. And I think we have more questions about dual booting coming up here. Anybody else have any comments to add to what I said?
My only comment was that which is what you just said about the fact that you're not dual booting, you're just running two operating systems. In the dual boot, if you are dual booting Windows and Linux, Linux can access all the files that are on your Windows side of your computer and can open them, modify them, save them back. But the reverse wasn't possible for a long time, and I still don't do it because I don't dual boot. But Windows couldn't access the Linux files because Windows couldn't read the ext file. But you could create a third partition that was a shared data partition, and then it wouldn't matter which one you're logged into or booted into, because you have to boot in, you could be able to access that folder or partition of files. But the only way to do what Dave's showing you is running two virtual machines inside your main machine and switching things back and forth.
Right.
The other thing that I did one time to try was that I took an external hard drive and I installed Windows on it. And then I could plug it into my laptop and boot to it. So I wasn't really dual booting, I was just booting to a hard drive, but it was a Windows hard drive, and so it functioned just the same way, until I found out that if you do it that way on an external drive, it can't upgrade. Microsoft kind of made that a possibility, but that was one way to do it on an external hard drive, and then I was able to boot to Windows or boot to Linux that way without having to partition my hard drive and run them on the same one, which can cause some problems.
Right.
Orv, last question. Well, and there's two. Dave H. would like to know where things are stored in the equivalent of, and you have that long URL. And the other one is, what is the default place that files are stored from an editor?
Orb is muted.
Thank you.
There we go.
I have a short presentation on that, like one screen, like right here. It depends. Text editors don't set a default directory. So if you start it from a GUI, it will be your home directory, home / whatever your username is. You can launch a GUI text editor from the command line just by typing it, like gedit or Kate. It will launch the GUI and it will be in the directory you launched it from. It will open and save from there. So it's generally not configurable. You can open something by maneuvering to that directory and opening a file, and then it will save it in that place. But you can't configure a default as far as I know. Word processors are different. If you're familiar with LibreOffice, it can do that. Let me see if I can do that. Probably good to show that to people. Oh, under Applications, Office. Well, it doesn't really matter which one because it's the same. There's the word processor. Okay, and it opened in another screen, but let me see if I can drag it over here.
You're not sharing yet.
See that?
Nope.
Really? Share screen. Oh, I see why. My bad. Okay. So here's LibreOffice. If you go under Tools, Options, it has a place for load and save. Oh, excuse me, it's up here under Paths. And it has, if you use a lot of graphics, you can save them under Home. Notice it's .config. These are default paths. You'll notice it's got, because I hardly ever use LibreOffice on this computer, it's to the default Home OBeach documents. And almost every Linux distribution, when you install it and create your user there in your home directory, it will create by default things like documents with a capital D, pictures with a capital P, videos with a capital V, and those will be default directories for all the apps. Now, I'm going to change this because that's not where I save things. I have mine under ORVs, and by the way, ORVs is not on this computer. ORVs is on my file server, and it's under Docs. I don't want to change the name. I'll just say OK. And you can see that the default file path for saving my documents, it's under Home, OBeach, ORVs, Docs. So that's how it works for that. I imagine any other of the word processors, I know OpenOffice will be the same. And I haven't used any other word processor under Linux for decades. So I don't know what the others may do, but I suspect they're configurable too.
Dave, Joe. would
Let
like-
me jump in just a second on that,
Okay.
because I'm looking out for the new people. You know, I have to say that for the most part, 90-some% of the way file systems work in Linux is the same way, you know, people were used to doing it in Windows. Pictures are automatically defaulted to go to pictures. Sounds go to your music folder. Documents go to documents. Downloads go to downloads because your browser is set that way. So unless it's some kind of an unusual type of file, I think you're going to find everything goes into the same place. The biggest difference I see is that in Windows, it's called users and then John. In Linux, it's called home and then John. Otherwise, once I open up John, I have the same folders that I did in Windows: documents, desktop, music, video, and I can create any additional ones that I want. So I really don't think that the file problem things are going to be where you expect them to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, Joe would like to know how to get started with Linux safely, in all caps. He's got 2 computers.
Well, yeah, safely is certainly the right way to go. If you have a powerful enough machine, just like I was talking about a few minutes ago, I would recommend installing VirtualBox, and that's a whole separate subject, the installation of VirtualBox. We've gone over that before at other meetings, but I'm not going to do that. But certainly installing VirtualBox and then downloading a distribution that you would like to test out, you create the virtual machine within VirtualBox and just run it and test it out. Now there's I think John kind of touched on this earlier. There's a website that you can test the Linux distribution online. Now, depending on your internet connection, that may not be a very pleasant experience. But also there is a website that you can go read about hundreds of distributions, and that's called linuxdistro.org. And we can put that in the meeting notes as well. And there's a list of, I think the top 100 are in the list, if I remember correctly. And those are based on what users are downloading. But you can go to that and download or open and look at and read about whatever distribution you think you might want to try. My top 3 basically are Elementary, Pop, and Zorin, which John touched on all of these earlier, and I like those because of ease of use. I hope that's helpful.
John,
Any other comments?
I was just going to add the website that we were talking about. I had to go look it up. Share. And this is the one that's called distrotest.net. And I got to get rid of my. Oh, it's not there. And what you do is you log in. Right now, they have 727 versions of things. And so you log in. And for example, you have to know the one you want. And so we'll do the one that Dave just said. We'll go to Z. And down here is Zorin. And so you would click on Zorin. And there's the different versions of Zorin. There's the light that you would do for a 32-bit machine. There is a paid version of Zorin that gives you a few extra desktops. So if you really like Zorin and you want to have options to make it look different, you can help them in their support. But then all you do, and I'm not going to do it because it'll take it, is that you just start it and it's going to start up inside of a browser. And you can try it out, test it out, see what you like. When you're done with that, you can go back and pick a different one out. And you can see that you know, there's a lot in there. And I was curious just to see, there it is right now. Here's the one that Mike's been telling us about, Windows FX, which is also the same as Linux FX. And so you can come here and try it out. And as you can see right there, just looking at that, you know, it looks like Windows. And now we have one that looks like Windows 11 because you can customize it. So you can come to distrotest.net and be able to try out easiest. Now it'll be slow, but you can try out and safely. That was the big capital letters, safely.
Yeah. That's even safer than creating a VirtualBox and trying it. So there we go.
Yeah, the difference though with VirtualBox, you could be able to install programs and save files and share files. I'm not quite sure if you can go the extreme of that when you're going online to a website version.
okay, John, this one's for you. And John has a laptop where Ubuntu controls a dual boot with Windows 10. The Ubuntu system is a partition on the Windows hard drive. I installed a Windows update and lost access to Ubuntu. The space is still allocated, but Windows will not recognize it. The system may be a little outdated now, but I would like to recover my Ubuntu drive if I can.
Yeah.
And can I say,
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised that at this point in time, John might be getting rid of Ubuntu. And this could be a moot question. What do you say? I mean, David, what do you say, David? Are you going to drop Ubuntu and choose something else? Just nod your head. Oh, there you go.
Are you talking to me, Judy?
No, I'm talking to Casimir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was his question.
Now, the thing is that by switching to a different distro, he would recover, because it's the Windows that updated, and reinstalling Ubuntu will get it, or any other one. Because what that does, it installs a program that's the boot program called Grub, And Judy says, that's food, isn't it? Well, this is the Grand Unified bootloader. So it's the program that when you have more than one, you get a menu that says, which do you want to load into? Well, when Microsoft does some of their updates, it rewrites that. So there are two ways. One way, somebody wouldn't necessarily want to have to reinstall their operating system, because then you have to customize it and whatever. If they didn't have a separate home, they would lose all their files. Another reason why always partition. But the simple thing is that you would just have to use a live disk so that you can boot to Linux, and you would go in and reinstall grub, then go into your actual, like the Ubuntu, and run a command to update grub so that it sees everything, and then you get back in. But I can't say for sure nowadays with what's happening with the newest 10 and even into 11, how much trouble that causes. And kind of that's why a number of us are really pushing, don't do the dual boots anymore, run the live, plug in the thumb drive, boot off of it, plug in a separate hard drive, so that the two of them do not have to get along, because they won't.
Mr. Kennedy, I'm at the end questions that are up for grabs for anybody, correct?
That's right, because we had some questions that nobody on the panel wanted, and you can see that I've lost part of my panel. Both Mike and Cal had medical appointments, so they had to leave. So I want to officially on air thank them for joining us for the time they have. And Dave's still here, Orb's here for a little bit while longer, and then I'm going to be like, everybody's abandoning ship. So
Actually,
yeah.
Orv sent me a chat, and he's bailing now.
Thanks so much, Orb. Catch you in December. We will have another Learning Linux in December, and Orb will be back, and hopefully Dave. So what we have now are some questions that nobody picked, and I didn't want to pick all of them and over again. So these are going to be questions that we're going to pop up, and if Dave wants to answer them, okay. If I want to answer them, okay. Or if you have an answer for this question that somebody submitted, then go to your reactions, hit your hand, and then I can go over and tell you to unmute, and you can answer that question. After these questions are taken care of, whether they get answered or not, then we will go into our open for anybody to be asking questions that haven't been asked, and get answers from anybody who's got answers for that. So Judy, let's throw the first question out and see if anybody wants to take it.
Okay, Larry H says, I have a Pentium 3 laptop with a 30 gigabyte platter hard drive that I'd like to replace with an IDE SSD drive. Will it support a Linux installation, maybe Ubuntu, or is it too old?
I think we have old versions of Linux that would run. I would think his computer could handle an SSD drive by switching over. And we just would have to get an older version, like we said in my list of things, such as like Debian, Zorin Lite, Sparky Linux, Antex or MX Linux. We can find you, if your hardware can handle the SSD drive, then we can find you a Linux that'll run on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, John. You need a 32-bit version of whatever Linux you're going to pick.
Yeah, and luckily we still have that. And the problem is that 32-bit is so old that trying to maintain 32-bit and 64-bit takes a lot of development. But we still have a few people that have some 32 bits that come up that still run. That's the amazing thing, that you have one that old that still runs.
Well, the Raspberry Pi still runs 32-bit.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, the Debian based, that's Raspberry and the Raspberry is on it, does still have 32-bit, but a number of them are going to 64 development.
Yep.
You know, if there's anybody else that has, you know, a comment on that, hit your reaction button. We'll let you answer that question too. And if not, we'll go on to another question.
Yeah, maybe somebody has the experience already.
Right.
Oh, I have two UFI questions.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
First one is Rich. Why do some updates have UFI secure boot pop up where you have to put a password in a second time? I'm using Linux Mint 20.1.
And I didn't, you know, offer to answer that because I'm running Linux Mint 20.2 on a machine that I guess has UFI, but I've never experienced that. So I'm not quite sure why that happens. If he's here, maybe he could kind of explain better what's happening, because I've never had anything pop up, even on my Windows machine, that wants some kind of the password that way.
I think he's initiated the password in the, you know, you can password your BIOS, and he's probably turned that on, and that's why he's getting that.
Thank you, Bill James. Okay. Yeah, if we'd have to find out if he has a password. Remember that, because I don't put a password on that. At school, I did. I didn't want any of the kids getting into the BIOS at school, but yeah, and because if you're trying to make any kind of changes with dual booting and stuff, it might resist that.
Okay, Bill, then what does he need to do to remove his password if that's what he's done?
You'd have to go into the UFI, which is like your BIOS, and disable the password.
How do you get there?
You have, well, what is it, in Windows 10, you have to use, I forgot what the shortcut is. Usually, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Can I come back to that? Let me come back to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Dave?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there is a command from Windows directly to make the computer boot to that for the next time you boot it.
Yeah, I think it would be also a question that, does he need to have the password on the BIOS or the UFI? And if he does have to have it, then that's what you deal with, because you're making a change, so it wants to protect you, and that's good. You know your system's working. If you don't need to have that, then you could turn it off and then not get that in the future. Yeah.
And Bill is looking it up as we speak, and he'll raise his hand when he's got the answer, and I'll say the other UFI question. Richard asks, what is the easiest method for setting up a dual boot with Win 10 UFI?
I don't have one for that.
Does anybody?
I do know that you have to turn off secure boot usually.
I
Maybe have to go to legacy.
Sorry, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I thought we had someone in one of these other meetings that has dual boot experience that might be able to answer that.
I think this is a question for DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
And I'll ask it and see if I come up with an answer. And if I do, I'll put it in the Q&A. Derek would like to know the state of Linux in light of the new OSS.
Okay. To my knowledge, I checked, Derek was not with us today because I'm not quite sure what his OSS, if it's open source software, which is my OSS, I'm not quite sure what the new problem would be with Linux. So without him or somebody who knows something that I don't know, and whether that OSS is even the same OS as I'm thinking.
What would be your answer if it is?
If it is my OSS, I don't know that there is something new that is affecting Linux, because open source software is going to be there. Yeah, I think Rich has a question answer for the
No,
last one,
Rich
maybe?
Rich is going to expand on the UFI.
Okay, good.
Good.
I don't know thinking without knowing for sure what
It's
he's
his
saying.
question.
Okay, without knowing for sure what the OSS.
I'll send him an email and ask him to
Rich.
be more clear.
Okay,
Can you unmute Rich, please?
he can do it.
Oh, cool.
I've asked him to.
Rich, you're able to unmute yourself now.
Can
Thank
you
you.
hear me now?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Okay. At one time I had a dual boot on that machine, but now I'm just running 20.1. Maybe that's my problem. I'm only running 20.1 now.
Okay, and that's when you always get the password box pop up.
Yeah, but not always, but sometimes, like maybe every third time. It's usually always when there's a kernel update.
And it's the password for your UEIF.
Yeah, it just says, and then I have to put it in twice.
Yeah, I've not experienced that. Like I said, I'm running 20.2 and but I probably do not have a password. Do you know whether or not you have, as Bill said, do you know if you have a password on your UEIF?
Well, that's what I probably have to look for, I think, what Bill was talking about.
Or you could go up to 20.2 like John and maybe it'll go away.
That's possible.
Yeah, but I'm not guessing because in Linux Mint to go from 20.1 to 20.2 is not necessary because 20.1 gets all the updates and mainly 20.2 is just so people can install without having to go back and get previous updates.
Yeah, I'm happy with 20.1.
Yeah, that's what we have. Our Linux computers in our My Club's classroom, we're at 20.1. And I told the group this last Friday, I said, all right, you're going to start getting bugged about the fact that there's a 20.2. Just ignore that. We're not necessarily ready to move up to 20 and all that process. I don't know if Bill's back with that. I can tell you from our repair guys, each brand of computer has a key that you use to get to your BIOS. Sometimes it's F11, sometimes it's escape, sometimes it's delete. And once you get to BIOS, then you should be able to get to where it's the password management part and, you know, take off the admin password for the BIOS. Yeah, we had a problem that our new computers for the classroom, we put a password on it and it asks for the password every time you start the computer up. And we don't want all of our members to have the password to the BIOS, so we had to change that somehow.
That makes sense.
My computer is a HP and it's about a little over 3 years old.
Yeah, that shouldn't be too bad.
And then my next question is, John S. wants to know how to make a system auto login.
I think what first came to my mind with that question is when you create your initial setup, there's an option when you're installing it. I think it's a checkbox usually that says auto log in. Now, once you're up and running, I'm not quite sure where you go in to do that. It's got to be in settings though.
Yeah, there would be always two ways. One, you can do it through the command line. And two, if you go into users and into the settings, there will be a box to say auto log in. Now, the problem that issue, the issue that comes up with me is that if you do that, that means that there's only one time you don't have to put your password in. Every time you do something administrative, you have to put the password in. So all you're doing is saving one typing of your password because you cannot make it so that like Windows, if you don't log in, then you have administrative rights without requirements. So I say, you know, to save yourself one typing of your a password, that's really kind of not, but some people don't want to do it that one time. But don't forget it, because it's the same password you have to do anything that's administratively.
Hey, I don't want to log into Windows at all.
Yeah, let me find, there's John.
That's the person who asked the question.
And John, you should be able to unmute if this is working right.
How do you do it from the terminal?
I don't know, because I never worry about doing it.
I think that would be an ORF question.
Yeah,
Oh,
or
okay.
or my friend Ken. Remember to ask that next Friday, John, when you come to
Okay.
the, or yeah, next Friday. We're going to have it, even though it's the day after Thanksgiving. We're having Linux. We're having Penguin for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure that there's a command that you can, you know, because you can go into the command line and change your password. So I'm sure that there's something in there that'll do it. And if you go into your terminal and do one of the manual searches, but as Judy says, DuckDuckGo, how do you turn on auto or auto login in terminal? You might get it too.
The downside of doing that, though, is if you have more than one user on your computer, it's always going to log in as that auto user. So then you have
Yes.
to log out and log in as the other user.
That's right.
Well, this is for a Pi that will only have one
Yeah,
function, and if it loses power, I want it to restart and log in automatically.
Okay, yeah.
that makes sense.
John, go into users and where you can create, and click on that user, and it might be under advanced. There should be a checkbox for auto login.
And I'll send the question to ORF. And if I get an answer from him, I'll send it to you, John.
Okay, thank you.
What is the equivalent to Windows Quick Assist?
I wasn't going to answer that because I said we just did that. It would be AnyDesk. Yeah, AnyDesk, Team Viewer. Quick Assist, as Bill has shown us, is a good way for a Windows 10 person to connect with the Windows 10 directly for remote access. So there are a number of choices in Linux. My choice would be AnyDesk because of the features it has. But Orv would tell you, if he was here, that there's another VNC, I think is what it is, that you can use remote kind of access.
VNC works real well.
Okay, there you go, Dave. Good. Thank you for bringing that in. I haven't used it because AnyDesk works so well for me, and TeamViewer before that.
Well, the downside of VNC is, I mean, it's simple to use if you're on the same network. If you're on a remote network, then it takes a lot more configuration to use. Whereas AnyDesk has all that built in, you don't have to worry about it.
And AnyDesk is cross-platform, whereas Quick Assist is Windows 10 only in the Pro.
He was just wondering if Linux had something like Quick Assist, and the answer is no. You use a third-party program.
Well, VNC would be that would be within Linux automatically, but that's cross-platform too.
Yep.
All righty. Phyllis would like to know what's a good way to clean up viruses, recommending a decent antivirus venue, please.
Can I say the nasty answer?
No.
Stop using Windows?
And I'm looking at this at Linux because I Googled this, and there's about 5 vendors out there who have AV for Linux.
Right. And, you know, in terms of Linux, I haven't had a virus on my Linux in years. the viruses that usually are in the news are viruses that usually are attacking servers.
Oh,
And the reason they get in is that a human did not do what they were supposed to do in updating or something that caused it in. If there's a virus, it's found very quickly because of open source, and fixes are sent out, right away. So there are, we have a virus program. I do it in my presentation on free software that you can use. I have it because that would be what I would use if I'm going to be getting something from somebody. I can scan a thumb drive to make sure it's good. Not that it's going to affect Linux, because most viruses are written for Windows and they won't run. In a Linux, nothing runs unless you give it permission to run. And so that's the first level, that you caused the problem because you weren't paying attention, allowed something to run. But there are a few Linux programs that you can run. To my knowledge, in the years I've been doing it, I haven't had a virus on my computer. How about you, Dave? Anything?
No, I haven't either. And most of my experience, though, has been on a Raspberry Pi. And so I have not had that issue. I don't go out on the web with the Pi.
did you say you have one, John, that you use just for grins?
Yeah, let me think.
Because the ones that I saw were all the ones that we would all know about, like Kaspersky and stuff like that.
Yeah, they have that. Let me think, because I just did it.
But you will let me know, and I can put that in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah. It's a very
Okay.
simple one.
Sig's question is, many of my Windows folders and file names contain blanks and occasionally other legal characters for names in Windows. Will those blanks or other characters in folder file names cause issues if I migrate to Linux?
I think we touched on this earlier a little bit, but in Linux, it will surround the file name with quotes or single quotes if it has spaces in it. So if you want to reference this new file with spaces in that name, you have to put quotes around it.
Yeah, I think the problem would arise if you were in the command line, because if there's a space, Linux will treat that as a file, a second file.
Right.
And so what Linux does in the file system, when you import something that has a space, they put a backslash in. And then the backslash signals Linux, the next thing is not a space separating names, it is the space separating words. And so it doesn't happen. I just get in the habit over the years that I never leave spaces in my files, just because that will eliminate any problems going back and forth. But no, only if you tried to type something in the command line would it possibly change.
I'm going to go through what's in the chat box and then it's up for grabs. John S. said he has the same printer, the brother printer that Mike was talking about. He uses Linux Mint, and he didn't have to download the brother drivers. It's scanned using the simple scan program without a problem. So maybe it depends on which version of Linux you're using.
I think that's true. Different ones come with different drivers.
How clever of me. And Howard says, thank you, John, because he also has a Canon.
Oh yeah, I loved my Canon. I wore it out and replaced it because I found a new one that was on a super sale.
On sale, on sale.
Yeah.
Michael says, I have a bunch of Raspberry Pis. I am using Mobex's term for SSH and XMING to get to the desktop. Are there other good Windows apps to connect to an X session?
To an X session. Well, I use Windows, what the heck is it called? Here, let me look it up. I use Windows Remote Desktop. That works really well on a Raspberry Pi.
Thank you. Mike Ungerman said before he had to leave, is John, and I don't know whether you did or not, comment on why we don't recommend dual booting. And when you finish, mention that he has a website that will be in the Q&A that addresses how to solve these problems. So I announced that, but do you guys really recommend not dual booting?
I am now.
I've never liked it. I've had issues, and we've seen other people, obviously, by the questions with issues.
Yeah, I used to in the beginning, but now putting them on a thumb drive and booting to the thumb drive, or the other idea that Dave talks about and we talk about, virtual machines.
Yep.
I've gotten to the point where if you're going to use Windows, use Windows. If you're going to use Linux, or use one of them with the other inside of it, like a virtual machine.
And by the way, either way works. Putting a Windows within a virtual machine in Mint works great.
John.
Let me give him a click here again.
I dual boot on a couple machines because I have programs that I use on Windows that I can't do functionally anything else in Linux. And the only problems I've had is with, well, I use the machines as Linux primarily, but when I have to use the Windows programs, then I have to go through and run the Windows updates, but I try to delay that as long as possible.
John, did you have any problems with the Grub rebooting after some of those updates?
And absolutely, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And my solution for that is I clone the whole drive when it's working, and that was my last solution when Windows messed up the drive. Is I had to restore the drive from the clone, and then work from there to get it back to a functional place.
But then you'd still have the problem again because Windows would want to update.
Well, yeah, well, that's the other problem that I had to work through that update so that it wouldn't do that, which I was able to get through that update without destroying the grub.
That's good.
But it was a process that learning process, but it took a lot of time, and that's the problem. You have to have time to be able to do this kind of thing. So it's a trade-off. When it works great. When it doesn't work, you got to have time.
But you would have to say that most of the time when it doesn't work, it was a Windows issue.
Oh, it's always a Windows thing. It's always Windows messes with the Linux. It's always that.
Okay, so the moral of the story would be before you download and install a Windows update, you do a clone your drive, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I clone on a regular basis anyway for just because as a backup. That's the way I back up.
What program do you use?
Clonezilla.
Oh, I know
but
about
Judy,
that.
your advice is good, but it still brings up your restored image back to before Windows did the update, and it's going to want to do the update again, and you'll be back to that unless you can solve that issue there.
That sounds like an endless loop to me.
Yeah, it does. How about having, no, never mind, 2 computers, one with Linux and one with Windows. But anyway, Michael says Linux under Windows. Windows has improved their Linux subsystem and also has Hyper-V as other options to VirtualBox.
Yep. Judy, Bud has his hand up.
Yeah.
Hey, Bud.
Yeah, regarding dual booting, the only good solution that I've ever seen to do that is actually, I used to have a removable drive bay, and I would swap drive bays. When I wanted to run Windows, I'd put the Windows drive in, and when I wanted to run Linux, I'd put the Linux drive in. Doesn't
Perfect.
bother updates and like that, and Windows doesn't screw up your dual boot.
Yep.
You know, separate machine or swappable hard drive is, I think, is the best solution for dual boot.
Yeah.
That's what I did years ago.
Or VirtualBox.
VirtualBox is so much simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it. I had a friend that had a laptop that could pop out the hard drive. And so he did. He had a Windows hard drive and he had a Linux hard drive. So when he came to the Windows meetings, he popped that one in. When he went to the Linux, he popped it out. But you got to have a laptop that has that feature that you can pop it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the desktop.
Melton, if you have your server thingy, couldn't you have 2 separate hard drives in that so you could have one for Windows and one for Linux and just go between those?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, but the way I have it right now with my desktop is I have to take it apart in order to put a hard drive in. I don't have an external drive bay.
Dave, I got a solution for you.
All right.
What we had to do with our classroom, because the Windows people didn't like the Linux having a partition, made us put in a separate hard drive, which was fine. But when you dual booted to the other drive, it's the still same issues that you have if you're booting to a different partition. So their solution was that they wired the power supply on a flip switch between the 2 hard drives.
Oh, there you go.
So when we flip it to the one, it doesn't even know the other hard drive exists.
Oh.
And so whenever we go to our Linux meeting, I go to every computer while it's off, flip the switch, and afterwards flip it back down. And I had them set it up so that, because they said, which way? And I set it up so that when you flip the switch up, goes to Linux, down goes to Windows.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just want to tell everybody that that was the technical thingy I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
John would like to know, are there step-by-step instructions for loading Linux on a thumb drive, and where would he find them?
DuckDuckGo. Some of the distributions, my particular distribution, I just have to go hit a button and it burns it. It's like the old days when we had a CD burning program. And but we've talked about it in some of our previous ones. Rufus is one program that does it, and the one that we like better is Etcher. And it's very similar to what Microsoft is doing. You know, they tell you to download the Windows ISO and then use their assist program, and then it burns it to a thumb drive. Well, Etcher and Rufus does the same thing. All you do is using those 2 programs, they ask you, where's the ISO? Here. Where do you want us to put the bootable file? There. Hit the button, and it, same things we used to use for years with the old programs that we did for burning CDs.
Yep.
Tim has his hand raised.
And we'll ask him to unmute.
And now you can unmute yourself.
Whoops, he did that too quick. Now he can do it. Where'd you go?
I don't know. I have very few people because I have my chat box full screen almost.
Tim, where'd you go?
Okay, well, let me ask another question and try to find him. Edward says the easy BCD program in Windows can be used to add a Linux boot to the menu. Has
Mhm.
anyone added Linux that way? Don't everybody raise their hand at once now?
No, because most of us use either Rufus or Etcher.
Etcher.
Okay, Bill James says he has the answer. He probably had it he had it like 20 minutes ago, but I'm just getting down to that now.
You have to unmute, Bill.
Try it
Okay,
now.
I'm sorry.
Could you
I was-
rephrase, say the question again?
The question was, as I understand it, is how to get into the UFI on a Windows 10 computer.
Yeah.
And to do so, you go to Update and Security, then click on the Recovery tab, and then go to Advanced Startup, and then it will, there's a button that says Restart Now, and then that will boot you into the UFI or the BIOS, whichever one is installed on the machine. And then you have to fish around for the password. I'm not sure where it's actually located, but there should be something password. It's probably turned on, but you're probably going to have to put the password in order to get into that. But then you just
Probably
need to
should, yeah.
disable it. You just need to disable it.
Tim's
Thank
coming
you.
back in. He got dropped out.
So again, you go to Update and Security. And then down to Recovery, and then go to Advanced Startup, and it will say Restart Now.
And he's going to send me those steps and I will include them in the Q&A.
Great.
And I have to also say, if it's Windows 11, we have to, it's totally different. But anyway, I don't think anybody's on that at this point.
Okay. Edward says the Raspberry Pi OS comes with VNC server, and he uses that in Windows 10 to connect to it.
Yep, it works good too.
And he has his hand raised. Edward?
Let me go find him a second here. I'm trying to get back to Tim, see if he is having a sound problem. Tim, if you have that question, raise your hand again. In fact, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to change that. So go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, so I mentioned that Raspberry Pi operating system comes with the VNC server supplied free by the company that sells it to Linux, to Raspberry Pi. And all you have to do is go into configuration, enable it, then you download the free VNC viewer, and then use that to connect with a graphical interface to the Raspberry Pis. In fact, I've even had two Pis going at the same time on the screen at the same time. And I think the VNC viewer is a commercial program, but you can use up to 3 connections at a time for the free version.
Thank you. Tim, you're back.
Wow, it worked this time. The first time I did it, I clicked on unmute and Zoom crashed.
Oh.
All I wanted to do was comment on dual booting and say that if it's dual booting that doesn't include Windows, in other words, different versions of Linux, I've never had any trouble, and it's a really good way of playing around with different things, especially on your non-main computer like a laptop that you're playing with. That's all I had to say.
Well, thanks, Tim.
One comment on the dual booting of Linux. I did discover, because I like to have a shared home directory so all my files can share, but you've got to be careful because different Linuxes have some different file structures. And I did my first install, everything worked fine. Did my second install, everything went fine. Went back to the first one and boom, would not run because the home directory for the other one, and I think it was PC Linux OS, their structure changed it. So when I went back to like the Debian based one, it wouldn't boot up because it couldn't access my home. And so then I finally had to say, okay, if you're going to dual boot, it's probably best to have a shared folder, but not a shared home. And each distro has their own home, but you can share files, so that those didn't. But that drove me crazy because I reinstalled it. It worked fine, went back to the second one. It wouldn't work then.
It's nothing worse than getting cross-link files. That's one of the other problems with dual booting. If you're not careful.
And the moral of your story, John, is?
Don't get too complicated.
Thank you.
Kiss it.
Steve would like to know everybody's opinion of Knoppix.
Knoppix, good.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's a version of Linux. It's a where did I have it? I have it. It's a I think on my slideshow. Oh, on my question, where did I put it? It's under. It's a Debian based. It comes right from Debian, but it's one that it's lightweight to use. Use it on a thumb drive, and it's a good version of Linux to troubleshoot. So if you have a computer that has a problem, running Knoppix is a good one because it's not a huge resource one, and it has tools to do some of the fixes that you need.
That's how I know it, Judy, is from my work world. I've used Knoppix to fix mainframe computers because I had no other way to get in.
Cool.
Most people don't like to use it because it's not pretty and exciting and whatever, but you know, it's the idea. What do you need? The program that's going to do the work or look pretty.
Fred says, what's the difference between terminal commands used in Mint versus Ubuntu?
Nothing. They're all Debian based, so that they are all using the same bash family. The difference that you would run into is sometimes the commands, and the reason I stay is in Debian family is because that's all the same. If I would move to Red Hat, there's a few different commands I'd have to learn. If I move to Arch, there's a few different commands you'd have to learn. But within the Debian world, pretty much everything is going to be the same.
I am finished with my chat box questions.
Wow.
We
have some time if anybody else wants to ask questions that they didn't think of.
Can you just unmute everybody at one time?
I already did that.
Thank you.
So just raise your hand so we can call on you, John.
John's muted.
Nope, he's not.
Okay. About the burning an ISO to a USB, there's a couple other programs. There's Ventoy and
oh yes,
Yummy, YUMI, where you can put multiple ISOs on one USB.
Yep. Yeah, I forgot we did a session on Ventoy because of the fact that you can put a multiple on, and so easy because you don't need any kind of program other than using Ventoy to set up the thumb drive. All you do is copy the ISO and put it in the thumb drive, and it makes it bootable. And then when you are tired of that, you just remove it off of the thumb drive and add a different one on. So yeah, if you want to have multiple, for example, I'm creating a toolkit that used to be you'd have to have a number of thumb drives with Knoppix and Gparted and this program and that. Now you can put them all on one thumb drive and have all your rescue tools in one place.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thanks for reminding me, John.
When you get that all together, can you show it to us at one of our Wednesday Linux workshops?
Not really.
Oh.
Because you have to boot up to that thumb drive.
Oh.
But I can show you it with, like we did before. What you can see is that I can plug it in, and you can see that the thumb drive has 4 or 5 different versions in it. I can take screenshots of the screen because it uses the grub that when you boot to the thumb drive, it says, okay, what do you want to boot to?
Right.
Cool.
But it's the idea that it's so easy. You're not burning anything. You just set, you create this special thumb drive with Ventoy, and then you just copy paste all your ISOs. It's so easy. I'll do some screenshots of those maybe.
Thank you so much. Come on, you guys. We need some questions.
Just another comment about Ventoy. I have a couple programs on there to allow me to go remove somebody's password that they forgot and can't boot. So I have a piece of software on there that Ventoy boots up. I go down and select that and remove the person's password. Then they can boot up and put in a new password.
You talking about Trinity?
Well, actually, no, but that's okay. I mean, there's lots of them out there.
Yeah. You know, that's the worry for Windows people is that your passwords don't stop Linux, because if I put my Linux thumb drive into your Windows computer, I can access all your files and don't need any permission to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
Then why do we have to have a password? Just asking, okay?
Well,
because the local person has to plug something into your computer.
Yeah.
Internet won't happen.
Right. You have to have physical access to the computer.
Right.
I know. Tim has a question.
Oh, I was just going to add to the Ventoy discussion, and something interesting I've learned recently is that when you have Ventoy set up the way you want, you can use a disk utility to create an ISO of it and use Etcher to write it to multiple if you want to share that with multiple people. And you can even edit that ISO from inside a file manager if you want to change what you have on that master one.
Very nice.
That's nice to know.
Yeah. I just don't always have the time because I'm trying to do so many different things to gather information to focus on individual things. That's great, Tim. Thanks. Well, while we're still sitting here, while people are thinking, I'm going to share quickly results.
Oh.
Here's our first one, and Judy, I can send you the thing, or you can do your screenshot. 73% of the attendees were doing it in some way, or looking at virtually or whatever. So we need to work on those 27% and get them to at least try it out, because you might be missing something. And most of the people aren't using it as their primary driver. If we look at the usage, most people are just testing it out. We have a number of people who are, but my focus for this workshop is for those people who are new to it and want to know more about it. And some people are using a file server like Orb with the Raspberry Pi. Oh, sorry, you didn't see that. I have to click another button, just like the share. All right, so there you can see that, because I know that Judy's screen capturing. If we go to, this is the one that was the harder one, because it was talking about the family tree. As you can see, Debian is probably the biggest tree that's being used. And then there are a whole bunch of branches that are coming off of Debian. Not too many people. Gen 2 is kind of the tricky, hard one. You got to really be a techie for that. And there's always somebody.
I'm not seeing that.
We're not seeing that, John.
Now you are. Got to have that extra button.
There we go.
So Gen 2 is very difficult one. It's a lot of you build it from scratch and all. But I was going to say that always somebody has to put out the fact that I use Arch. Arch people always say, I use Arch, which is just another one. But you can see that most of them are Debian. Who's that? Who's that? But let's go into the actual different distros. And this one I'll have to scroll because I don't think I can make it that much bigger. The spreadsheet will say it. But here you can see that interesting that I think the number one is mostly Mint.
We can't see it.
Is mostly Mint, followed by the Ubuntus. Now, the problem with Ubuntu is there are 7 different main Ubuntus. They're all the different desktops. And so Mint has 3 desktops, but it's only listed once. Ubuntu, you have to go to each website to get that. But Peppermint, few people are trying it out.
You can't
Raspbian,
see that.
how can you not see it?
All we see is your first screen.
Yeah, we
Okay.
see down as far as elementary.
Try scrolling on your computer.
Oh, it works.
Cool.
And you can see that we have a few people that are doing POP. Some people are using something other, and I don't know what that is. But whoa, one person said they've tested out that. But as in the list, Slackware is pretty much by itself, doesn't have too many branches. But Debian spawns Knoppix, Raspbian, and Ubuntu. And Ubuntu spawned Mint and Elementary and Peppermint. Red Hat gave us Fedora and CentOS, which is mostly the server one. Arch gave us Manjaro and a couple of others that a lot of people don't know about. Gentoo is by itself and gave us Sabanian. OpenSUSE, and then Solus, PC Linux, PopOS are kind of like the new guys on the block. So there's a lot of them out there, but the reason Mint, I think, is up here is because it's so easy to use. And the second choice would be Ubuntu. And then the last question was what desktop people like the most. And again,
We're still at distro.
right,
Oh, thank you.
again, scroll to see the others, but Cinnamon is the most popular, and that's because most people are using Mint, and the flagship for Mint is Cinnamon. I use Mate, but with Ubuntu, Ubuntu has a KDE Plasma, an XFC, a GNOME, a Cinnamon, a Mate. So, you know, they get spread out for that one. And then the new guys on the block, Enlightenment, Pantheon, and Budgie and Deepin. So we got quite a lot of different ones out there. I threw in this last one because there are a couple people that use what's called Windows managers. And all that is like the old Windows back with 3, that all you had was Windows that popped up and went away. It didn't have all the extra trim and stuff like that. So a lot of people want to be simple and just have Windows Manager instead of a full-fledged desktop entertainment. So those were the surveys. We'll have those results maybe in the follow-up material too, just to have people you know, see. Not a big scientific. It was only for 60-some people that were here, but it's something I hope people see, that you know, people are out there, they're trying it, and a lot of times people who try it like it. Stu, answer me a question, or give me a question, or give us a question.
Or a comment.
Or a comment, yeah.
Hey, John, I wanted to mention Gen 2 was used by Google to bring Chromebooks. And it's also the base of Android. So when you look at Gen 2, looks like it wasn't popular, but it's probably used more often than what some of the others are.
That would be. I guess I didn't realize that was that. And I also have to point out too, for all the Mac users, Apple and Mac OS is a branch of Linux. Right. You know, maybe it's unspeaking cousins, but they go back to the same kind of kernel that starts it. So they are, you know, closely related. But
they're more BSD.
Yeah. And that's another one that we haven't even talked about, the BSD version of a kernel.
Well, it's really, they don't consider themselves Linux though.
Right.
They consider themselves BSD.
Well, Apple considers themselves Apple. You know.
Exactly.
Right. That's good. So now we know that the popularity of Gen 2, but the trick is that somebody has taken Gen 2 and made it easily usable, because from what I understand, you really want to have want to learn the deep down secrets of Linux to use, Gentoo and get it running.
When I started in college, that's what the professor was using, was Gentoo. So you had to really dive in.
Yeah. I tried to build it once and it never worked from the repositories.
Good. I think it was, let me see for sure. It was Michael Swift said that, he's got BitLocker on his hard drive. And so Linux can't read that. And that's because it's encrypting. And of course, if something's encryption, nobody reads that. So that's one way to protect if you want to keep Linux user from getting into yours. But Windows people have to be happy and glad there is Linux, because so many times people who have Windows problems can be resolved and fixed by using Linux to get in there and do it.
Yeah.
Questions, comments? This is going to be close to going on.
If I just had one more comment. You were talking about the different distros, and I found an OS out there called Nix, Nix OS, and you have to, if you really like to tinker, that would be one to play with, because you have to build it completely. All the packages, everything. You build like a script file in order to install it.
Dennis.
I've got a Win 10 computer. It's a Dell 3050 small frame factor. It has UEFI on it, and I want to convert that machine to Linux Mint Cinnamon. Do I, using gparted and that kind of thing, do I need to go into the boot and change it from UEFI to a legacy boot first, or can I just do a conversion without worrying that it has UEFI there?
My suggestion is I would try it first, because Microsoft, because Microsoft, just install, because a lot of times Microsoft now has let out what you have to have for secure boot was the biggest problem. Secure boot wouldn't let anything else boot up other than Windows. So I would try it first, because some of the distros are now able to play well with UEFI and the secure boot. Then if it doesn't, then go into the BIOS and turn off secure boot and maybe turn back legacy. But I would give it a try first. It's not going to hurt anything to give it a try and see if you can install it without messing with that.
Oh, it won't hurt anything trying to just install it to the Linux Mint first without doing anything with it?
No, it'll either let you do it or won't.
Okay.
Now, Dennis, are you talking about wiping out Windows and starting over with Linux?
I am.
Okay, so then be sure you burn your flash drive before you turn off your Windows computer. Right?
Turn off. Say that again.
Okay, yeah. Be sure you build your flash drive to boot from before you shut it down.
Oh yeah.
I've got an ISO of the Linux Mint Cinnamon
on a flash drive.
Yeah. The one thing I didn't know if I should do though is, in case anything in the whole process goes wrong, should I create a backup of the whole Windows 10 computer that I could restore if something went wrong, or is things not likely to be a problem?
I would say if you wanted to go back to Windows, back it up. But
which I never would do. I just want to go Linux.
Yeah.
So,
I would say, if I would, what I did on my computer, probably because it's been a while, is that I would have first tried to just boot to my install and see if that would work. Right. If it won't let you boot, turn off secure boot. Then I would, put it back in, boot up, try to install. If it didn't, it might mean that I had to go back to legacy. And it's very likely that this laptop of mine is no secure boot and running legacy. And when I did that, it's running. And I never made the backup to 10 on that. And the reason for that is you can always download the 10 ISO from Microsoft, plug it back in, it'll read your hard drive, you'll get your licensing back. You just have to customize it to what it was before. Or as Dave said, yeah, you could back it up if you needed to.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the only, not just for him, I might say that if somebody got a brand new, I've got a person in our computer club that had to buy a new computer. He's a Linux person, doesn't want Windows, but it came with Windows. He is planning to back it up and then install Linux, but keep that in case something went wrong during the warranty period of the laptop, that he could put the Linux back or put Windows back on, so that nobody would say, well, you voided warranty because you put Linux on it. Well, putting Linux on a computer isn't going to do damage to, hardware, because it's software.
Right.
But that would be. Now, the other thing, we've got somebody else that just bought a new one, and our recommendation is buy a new SSD drive, take out the Windows SSD, put it on a shelf forever and ever, put in the new SSD and build your Linux.
That was my plan.
Yep.
That makes total sense to me.
Yeah. And that's what, that's the plan I would tell people now, is that SSD drives are cheap enough that just go out and buy one, swap it, store the Windows one for whatever reason you might need.
Yep.
I have two questions.
For the $100 of the SSD drive, it's worth doing that.
Well, it's and even better because you could get away with 128. That's what I've got in my computer, is a 128, and that's enough for dual booting 2 Linuxes. So 128's prices are even down lower than that.
Yep, that's true.
Judy.
This is from David, who is probably not going to be using Ubuntu much anymore. But he said, I was using it as a backup system in case of Windows crashing, but having Linux on a flash drive seems like a better solution since I can use it on any PC. Any problems he might run into by booting from a flash drive besides making the drive bootable?
Secure boot on a Windows machine.
Okay.
The other thing he needs to be sure of is that the flash drive has, what is that called, John? Retention? It's not retention. It's where you can actually store files on your flash drive. Besides,
you know what's the other solution, Dave? Put a second thumb drive in on the other plug. Port,
there you go.
And then save your files to that. Because some thumb drives are like the old-fashioned CDs. You couldn't write to them. But, so plug in a different thumb drive, or of course, and Judy has a member in her group that won't want to hear this. You can put files up in the cloud and run it that way. And I do know, I have heard.
Actually, I have two.
I've heard of people who only run Linux on a thumb drive, so there is absolutely nothing left on the computer for anybody to access. Maybe they're too paranoid or whatever, but all of their stuff can be in the cloud and none of it on the computer. So yeah, that's the definite. If the secure boot would block you trying to boot, and that's what secure boot was supposed to do, then you might not be able to. But I think some of the distros have now put in what Microsoft would require that allows them to be recognized as an okay, safe, bootable operating system.
And we can check this out, Dave Milton, at our December meeting and find out how David accomplished everything that he needs to.
I want to hear.
Steve says, which version of Linux plays best with others?
Plays best with others. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Yeah, others what? And there
Well,
might,
if you're going to have two versions of Linux on your machine,
oh,
which ones go to better?
they all play together well, unless you try to use a shared home.
Oh, okay, that's what you were talking about earlier.
Right, because I had a Debian based one, and I think I was trying to test out PC Linux OS and use the same home folder or partition, and the file structure was different. So one locked out the other. But once I made that partition just a shared partition. The two of them ran side by side just fine. I'm running on my main desktop. I'm running Mint and MX Linux, and I was doing a dual boot on the laptop, and I said, forget it. I'm just doing one, just because I hardly ever go to the other one. It'd be faster to go to virtual machine.
Yep.
And Judy, my laptop's video is freezing again.
Huh. I'm recording.
Good.
But not the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I can splice.
Yeah, it's always at the end, so it must be getting worn out.
Yeah. Oh, is it time for a new laptop?
Yeah, but there's no money for that.
That is true, isn't it? Darn. Questions, comments? Jimmy, you're on.
Yeah, we do hundreds of Mint machines. We noticed that if you use the install and it's a run live, that you don't get all the drivers sometimes until you do the updates. And usually we hook it in with a wire to do the initial install and see how it is. And if we have problems with the wireless, there's a TP-Link WN725N that's only $9 at Micro Center, and we use that if we can't find a driver for the wireless. And it's more like about half. Oh, there you go. It has to say, the wireless has to say it works with Linux.
Yeah. I had that problem years ago with Ubuntu, and we had a Linux group that had every 6 months had a big Linux fest because we came out with a new version, and we met at the public library, and the room had wireless access. But on my old laptop, whenever I would install, I could install it because I had the CD, but then I could never connect to the network because the unusual Wi-Fi driver that it needed wasn't there. I'd go home, wire it up, download the driver I needed, unplug, and I was back to business. So I used to carry a folder with the Wi-Fi driver in it. So I would just have to, install the new version, pop that in, copy it over, and then it was on there. Nowadays, it's not as much of a problem, but once in a while, a manufacturer will throw in a not most common. And so a distro might support 5 Wi-Fis, and yours is number 6 in line.
Yeah.
And you're talking about wired equal Ethernet.
Yes.
And when, what are you doing that you're doing all of those computers at one time with Mint?
Yeah, Jimmy.
Oh, we refurbish computers for non-for-profits, and we give them away. That's one of the things we've been doing for the last 15 years.
Cool. What group are you with?
With the Westchester PC User Group.
Of course you are. Very good. Outstanding.
Yeah.
From the top of the East Coast to the bottom of the East Coast. The Sarasota group does the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Glad to see that you guys are still doing, and I know you're doing that. It's PC Renew, correct?
Yeah, PC Renew is, we got involved after Rockland. And
okay, and their guy moved down to Florida.
Hank, yeah.
Yeah, Hank retired to Florida.
Yeah.
And the PC Renew, they kept meeting online, even though they couldn't meet in person during the COVID stuff. They wanted to keep together and talk about, what their plans are going to be and stuff like that. And I always thought that was way cool. So people didn't go find something else to do on that particular day.
Here's what Jimmy was talking about. mine only costs from Microcenter, I think $5, but this is an older one back a few years. But I keep this because I never know when I'm going to work on somebody's computer, especially if they bring it into our building and the Wi-Fi won't work. All I do is slap this in and I've got Wi-Fi again. So TP-Link has a great one for under $10, and I just keep it with me.
So that's a USB Wi-Fi device?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could groups use that if they meet in a library and the library Wi-Fi sucks big time and they don't know about a hot spot or don't want to do that?
No, that just connects to their Wi-Fi.
Okay, thank you. Edward, you're on.
I just have a comment. You mentioned before about swapping out SSDs. Some laptops it's really difficult to change out the SSDs or even get into the laptop. Like my laptop, I have to take out 12 screws and then pry the two parts apart. It takes about 15 minutes just to get it apart. Then you risk breaking the clips on the separating the two halves. So it's possible, but it's not for a beginner to try.
You're right.
And I never work on laptop hardware unless it's half of the number of screws like that. With a laptop, I don't take it apart. I let somebody else do it because our top guy who does our repairs and stuff used to work for a phone company, so he knows all those. He can take dead monitors home and make them work again. We have our classroom uses those recycled monitors. Anyway, I guess he did it one time, took apart a laptop, put it back together. But when they put it back together, the cable that went to the video for the monitor got pinched and caught fire.
Oh.
So I said, nope, I'll remove RAM. I'll remove a hard drive if it's easy.
Yep.
I bought computers for the legal department many years ago. General counsel. This is a desktop that they refused to work on them. So it was, here comes Judy going to CompUSA across the parking lot. And they said they'd look out the window at me and laugh because I'd be carrying one out to my car. And then a few days later, here I'd be coming back with it and taking it, hauling it up in the elevator, plugging it back in and everything. Fun and games. Questions, comments? Anybody out there?
I think we've worn them all out.
Yeah.
Then,
Judy, do you have a list of next month's workshops? Did you say you had it?
I have on December 1st, we are having Marcia Berkey from the Sarasota group talk to us about how to create a photo album in PowerPoint. And Bob Bowser from the seniors group in Kansas City is going to show us all kinds of e-cards, free and paid, that we can create and send out for holidays, birthdays, whatever you name it. And then John Kraut is going to show us how to make a calendars to give as a present. Because of the supply chain stuff, we might need to have to do something like that. And then whatever the Linux team is going to do. And as I said to John, we get almost 3 weeks off before we start again. And we will begin January with a roundtable on, just like we had last year, but it's 2022. What do you have planned for your groups? And how can APCUG help?
And to follow that, the December 15th Learning Linux workshop will be all about installing software from the easiest way to do it to the little bit harder way. And there's a number of different ways, and we're going to be talking about all that. And so it'll be kind of a fun afternoon with that. So all of your questions about installing software, getting software and installing software.
And Dennis has his hand raised.
I just missed from John. What was the brand name of that little wireless adapter you were showing?
It's TP-Link.
TP-Link, okay.
Yeah, and I also just because I like them, I have a TP-Link extender in my house. I use, so I like TP-Link stuff.
So do I.
What's your router?
My big router is an Asus, but my
Just asking.
my extender, because I need to get it farther to the back room. So yeah, TP Link works great, and this thing is just amazing. It's so small that they have some of them that are the size of thumb drives, but when you can have one that's that size, go with it.
Okay.
Going, gone. Take us off, John.
Well, it's been a real enjoyable afternoon. I hope that you aren't leaving without a question that needed answering, because we gave you time, and there were other people, and I appreciate the others that have added into some of the comments and answers. We will see you next month. In fact, next week. No, next week. We're all taking Turkey Day off. So enjoy your Thanksgiving. We'll see you in December for 3. If you are a club that is having elections at the end of the year, please make sure that we get the update through the user group listing service, so that when we send out stuff, we won't be sending it to the wrong people. Thanks so much. See everybody next time.
Thank to John's team and everybody who participated. We appreciate that, because it makes it much more fun.
Yeah, and I thank Bill for being my right-hand person there to take care of issues that pop up, and why he got kicked out as a co-host, I don't know. It's one of those weird things. All right, see everybody next time.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Judy.
Dave, thanks you.